Elite capture is a term that stems from experts such as David Mulrooney, Canada's former ambassador to China. It stemmed really from my reporting on an earlier NSICOP report, one of the first reports on foreign interference, which in a redacted form disclosed that Canada appeared to be a permissive target for China's interference. I later got an unredacted version of that 2019 NSICOP report that revealed a lot more. But again, in a nutshell, if you're permissive of foreign interference from another hostile state, that's indicating that there's either willful blindness, complicity, or capture. And so the concept of elite capture is that states like China, Russia just make it so profitable, so easy to accept their influence, either through what look like good trade benefits or diplomatic benefits that really come with hidden strings that the rest of the population doesn't understand. Your leaders can be captured by hostile states that are really deeply interfering, in a very subtle but effective way. And so the concept of elite capture simply being that if you have enough of your elite captured, that is senior industrialists, senior lawyers, senior lawmakers, senior political aides, and on the political side, as it turns out, you're receiving much of your election fundraising from China's United Front Work Department, it simply becomes the case that you don't have to capture every MP. If your party is captured and really is in hoc to a foreign agency that in a very subtle way is manipulating your contest through donations and diaspora support, which comes, by the way, starting with diaspora threats, that leads to the threat of state capture. And that is, it's very hard to detect, but it's a real concept. It's when you may have a government in Belize, but under the surface, it's owned by Chinese triads, which is something I've read in an intelligence document. And so most Canadians wouldn't believe that it could happen anywhere. But if it can happen in a Latin American country, then you can bet that China is trying to make it happen here. And in my view and research, they're getting pretty close towards their goal.
So that was the next question. Where are we now on the arc between elite capture and state capture?
On the arc between elite capture and state capture, this is one of these times and concepts where when I first heard about state capture, my first reaction was that's impossible in Canada. So the sources that are raising it to me, again, I have to take that with a grain of salt and as my father said, be from Missouri on that one. You gotta show me, don't just tell me. And so I have to apply that to myself. I have to show myself, and that was the reporting journey. People were telling me that Canada's not really in the Five Eyes anymore. Again, shocking. No one else in the world, would on the surface believe that. But if, very expert Canadian governmental authorities are saying that, if American authorities are saying Canada is not trusted on that level anymore, then, it starts to suggest to you that Canada is moving on that arc further. It's moving out on a dangerous limb from elite capture and approaching that threat of state capture. So where we are, it's sad to say it. If you do believe that Canada is a lower member of the Five Eyes, I think you have to accept that someone's being successful in moving towards a pretty, a dangerous control of our state levers.
In your latest chapter for your book, in the third edition, you mentioned that U.S. sources are alarmed by what is going on in Canada. Presumably you've got very good U.S. sources now coming to you. Maybe you can explain what that means.
My knowledge of how U.S. sources felt about Canada started with the Canadian governmental sources that would express that they were, talking to the American counterparts and starting to explicitly hear that phrases like Canada's not in the Five Eyes anymore. That, credible people are telling, me as a reporter that they've heard that directly. It may be an offhand comment at a Five Eyes meeting on the sidelines, But when credible and smart people hear things like that and they relay it back to a reporter, it starts to suggest that there's something to dig into there. And so when I was hearing this from Canadian sources that said that American intelligence was pretty instrumental in establishing some very key intelligence in the Chinese election threat network story. So in my belief, that would relate to financing. It would relate to senior politically connected Canadians that apparently the Trudeau government, wasn't taking very seriously warnings from Canadian intelligence. And it might have taken, more persuasion or more information from American intelligence to add to that, what's being termed a mosaic of intelligence sources. And so I believed and assessed that it was plausible that America is looking at the situation in cities like Toronto and Vancouver. There's concern. Remember, in Wilful Blindness, before even reporting on the election interference story, I recounted how a US official reached out to myself as a reporter in Vancouver. I sat down for coffee and was told the US government has a growing concern of China's economic and political footprint in Vancouver. So these are, the reporting episodes over the years that pile up, where you're starting to hear from Canadians and Americans that, Ottawa, we've got a problem, and it's not being dealt with.
So what will the U.S. do if this keeps up?
The U.S., I read a very interesting historical account. I think it was in relation to William Lyon Mackenzie King being stunned by an American president out of the blue at a joint speech saying the United States will not allow the sovereignty of our northern friend and neighbor to be encroached upon, with the hidden meaning there that it was not just a promise to protect a friend, it was a message to Canadian leaders that should they not protect themselves, the United States will take its own military, political, diplomatic actions. Therefore, again, as I suggested in Wilful Blindness, one of the early versions, the first version, I was getting the sense that we're in danger of losing our sovereignty in Vancouver, in Canada, because we're giving it away to China. The Americans, rightly, will start to put more liaisons, more intelligence sources, more operators into Canada, because they can't put up with China, Russia, and Iran running roughshod over our institutions in Canada, which is what's happening. So ultimately, if America has to assert its authority in Canada, I believe it will. That's just logical. And I think in a subtle way, we start to see that happen a little bit.
I'm going to turn in a second to a bit more of a personal journey, but I want to have a very clear and simple definition of what the United Front is and what it does, because I know that you've been writing how they're interfering in every aspect of Canadian life. So again, what is the United Front and what do they do and how do they interfere?
The United Front, or the United Front Work Department, in essence, it's the way that the Chinese Communist Party, which is a very fractional elite of almost 1.5 billion people, the United Front is how the Chinese Communist Party asserts control over all elements. Every person in mainland China is the subject of United Front activity, and that is to bring those masses, which as a CIA report memorably describes it, could rise up if they wanted to. The United Front is seeking to control and co-opt all elements of Chinese society to the ends of essentially serving and protecting the Chinese Communist Party regime elite. And so the just stunning and alarming findings that I had in Wilful Blindness, and which were buttressed by new intelligence sources on the election interference story, was that China's United Front, or its magic weapon as it's called in Chinese documents, has been scaled up massively since Xi Jinping became General Secretary in 2012. We can read in Canadian court documents now something like 40,000 new cadres added to the United Front Work Department. It's funded, we can now read in Canadian documents, at $2.6 billion per year, with about $600 million of those annual funds flowing into foreign countries to populate, fund, and activate these United Front influence networks, which, to put it very simply, are flooding the zone in Canada to surround our politicians, our influencers, in every way possible, but very physically. As I wrote in Wilful Blindness, the photos tell the stories. These United Front Work Department meetings in Vancouver, in Toronto, and Montreal, I could never get over the shock that people that standing beside our Prime Minister, glad-handing, raising a red glass of wine as it may be, in those crowds were known money launderers, known suspected high-level gangsters, known senior suspected Chinese intelligence officials, documented money launderers that were in my casino money laundering intelligence reports, that were, fingered or pointed out in New Zealand money laundering activities. These are the same individuals that are key in the Chinese election interference story. That's the United Front.
Interference. I mean, how bad could it really be?
I often hear people talk about, even up to our former Prime Minister Jean Chrétien, saying a few ridings, what's the real damage? And I would tell those people that more informed, more modern, more in tune with the real dangers to Canada sources would put the number of people allegedly colluding with China in senior levels in Canadian government, elected or appointed to Senate, potentially over 50. And so if you take that number and you add all the staff surrounding them, you add all the bureaucrats, multiple levels of government, it can't be less than thousands of people in Canada that are implicated by colluding with foreign states. And so that in itself is unacceptable, but I would further tell people that the most advanced edge of US government reporting, which is now public in congressional hearings, is that intelligence and law enforcement believes in the United States that the Chinese Communist Party is willfully and intentionally incentivizing fentanyl trafficking and the related money laundering around the world. So this is how they are trying to attack and undermine the United States. If the lawmakers in the United States are recognizing that and starting to take action, if anyone in Canada in turn thinks that it's not happening in here, you need to look at yourself in the mirror and become a better reader. And you need to understand that Canada is being attacked in a worse way. And you see the deaths in Vancouver, you see the increasing, you see the scourge of fentanyl, opioids rolling across the country now. Every city, you can now see what I was seeing as a young reporter in Vancouver. It's starting to spread. If the US government says the Chinese Communist Party, in conjunction with Mexican cartels and others, are behind that, everyone should care that the Chinese Communist Party is behind that, and it has to be counteracted. There's no way to safe supply or kind of skirt your way around that.